Greetings! Welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where today we're going to do a big discussion and demonstration of fruit tree pruning. Now, if you'll bear with me for just 1 second, I want to talk a smidgen about the structure of this video. I'm going to start with some nuts and bolts stuff about how trees grow, about what water sprouts, suckers are, about fruiting spurs, about how the trees set fruit, all of those things. Some of this I'm doing right now in real time as we're going out into the pruning season. Some of this is clips that I collected earlier in the year when I had some moments of opportunity to show something cool. Then when we're done with that, we're going to go and we're going to prune a mature but smaller and simple tree. And then at the end, we're going to talk about pruning and restoration pruning of large overgrown apple trees. And I'm going to put good chapters in all of this so you can track and skip and go back and get the information you need efficiently. So hopefully that'll help you. Now, before we get into the pruning demonstration, I do need to talk about some of the nuts and bolts stuff. A lot of this is misconstrued. A lot of this is, well, I'll put it this way. A lot of the emphasis has been put on the wrong syllable enough times for long enough time that there's a lot of confusion about what some of these things are. Okay? And that's not with bad reason, right? Most of the information out there about pruning fruit trees comes from the orchard industry. Okay? And people naturally think, well, if somebody's doing this for their living, they must have the best way to prune trees. And that's true. They have to a point. They have the best way to prune trees for them. But it's not necessarily the best way to prune trees for you, because orchardists and homeowners have different goals. Typically, a homeowner with a couple of fruit trees is applying the heuristic, I want the most fruit possible from this small number of trees. Okay? That's not an orchardist's heuristic. An orchardist is thinking, I want the largest amount of money possible per acre that I have in orchard. Okay? And some of the things that they do with their trees to shrink them, dwarf them, stretch them out, make espaliers or espaliers, I'm still not sure how to properly pronounce that word. Depends on how French you want to sound, I guess. I don't know. And a lot of the things that they do are geared at maximizing the financial return based on the assumption that their greatest cost is labor. Okay? So the orchard is trying to produce the largest dollar value return per unit labor expended. And they're not actually producing the largest poundage of fruit that every tree is capable of. Okay? And also, if you're an orchardist and you're about to turn loose a whole bunch of very loosely instructed people on your trees that are going to go out as a horde of minions pruning your trees, you have to give those minions very simple, direct instructions. And that leads to oversimplifying and misconstruing some things. Okay? And then somebody who learned that way then applies it to their own fruit trees. They get reasonable responses and they recapitulate the half-understood information. And you kind of get a long chain of repeated partial instruction, and that causes a lot of confusion. So I want to deconvolute all of this. And at the end of this video, I want you to actually understand how an apple tree grows, what an apple tree is doing. And all of this is true for others as well, right? All of the rose family fruit trees, which is your stone fruits, your apples, your pears, your stone fruits and your pome fruits, really. Apple, pear, peach, cherry, apricot, etc. That group of fruit trees, okay? I want you to really understand what the tree is doing so that you can interact with it appropriately based on your set of goals, okay? Not just apply a memorized rule based on somebody else's set of goals, okay? And that's going to take a little bit of time, so please do bear with me through this. The first thing you need to know about a tree, and this is true not just of the fruit trees, but all trees, is that all of their growth is hormonally dictated. Okay, so why does a tree take the shape that it does? And it has to do with the balance of hormones exchanged back and forth between the growing tips on the top of the tree and the roots underground. Okay? So the growing tip of a root produces a hormone which is taken up and stimulates the growth of branches. Okay? And then the growing branches produce a hormone which migrates down and stimulates the growth of roots. Okay? Now, the hormone the branch tips produce stimulates roots growth, but it inhibits branch growth. Okay? So when you have a little growing tip right here, that little growing tip is inhibiting branch growth throughout the rest of this section. Okay? And when that grows up and up and up and up and up, far enough away, another side branch comes out. Okay? And then that grows up and up and up and up and up. When it's far enough away, another side branch comes out. And that hormone balance is how the tree controls its branching structure and branching distance. Now, why can this little tip grow up and the side branch only comes out when the growing tip is far enough away? Well, the answer is because even though you don't have side branches coming out of this twig right now, you have a lot of dormant buds that are capable of becoming side branches. And then the same thing in the roots. The hormone that the roots produce, which stimulates branch growth, inhibits root branching in the same way. And as the root tip grows far enough away, out pops a root branch. And then as that grows far enough away, out pops another root branch. So they're talking back and forth. That hormonal balance controls everything. These hormones are called auxins and cytokinins. Okay, and there's multiple different hormones with specific chemicals within those two classes, right? But auxins and cytokinins. Now, if you go into a tree and you just cut off gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of green matter, okay, the branch tips, you have now eliminated that hormone. Okay? So remember that the hormone produced by the branch tips is going to inhibit those dormant buds from sprouting side shoots. Okay? So if you cut off, if you come and do like a road crew shear job on a tree, don't ever do that. Please don't ever do that to a tree that you love. But hypothetically, if you did, right, you just shear the tree and remove all of that top. You've now removed all of that hormone which is inhibiting branching. At the same time, you haven't touched the roots. So the roots are going to push up their branch stimulating hormone. So you have removed the inhibition while maintained the stimulation. So all of those dormant buds are just going to explode into side branches. Okay? And those side branches are, in technical terminology, called epicormic branches, which is any branch which originates from a dormant bud later in the life of the plant, okay, rather than the actively growing tip in real time. Those epicormic branches are what orchardists and landowners tend to call either suckers or water sprouts. Okay, all three of those words mean the same thing: sucker, water sprout, epicormic branch. I will rather flippantly use all three of them from time to time. But they're all the same thing. And they're these dormant buds that were sitting there all along, and when the hormone signaling changed, they sprouted a side branch. Now, this is how the tree responds to stress and disturbance. The tree needs a certain amount of leaf area and a certain root to shoot ratio. Okay? For most things in the rose family, it wants about a 50-50 root to shoot ratio, about the same amount of green matter as roots below ground. Okay? And it uses this hormonal back and forth to control that. So if the tree is traumatized because some big old, you have to remember, it's like in modern time, we don't have a lot of gigantic land animals that can just chew down a tree, but that's only true starting 12,000 years ago, right? Before that, you have your mastodons, which were browsers. You have your giant ground sloths, which were browsers, right? You have these gigantic browsers that could come up to an apple tree and literally eat it to the ground. Mm-hmm. Right, so it needs to measure, the tree needs the ability to measure how much has been lost and then rapidly replace it. And that's what your water sprouts are doing. They are not sapping energy from your tree. That just makes my hair catch on fire when I hear people say that water sprouts suck energy out of the tree. No. They do affect energy distribution within the tree, but they affect it in a positive way. Okay? So if the tree is investing energy in producing water sprouts, it is telling you that it has too much root and not enough shoot and is trying to rebalance itself. Okay? At the same time, if you go and over prune, so some people have been told this lie so long that water sprouts suck energy from the tree, that they will go and they will declare war on their water sprouts and just shear all of them all the time. My grandfather did this. He had a cherry tree in his yard, and he would shear all of the water sprouts all of the time because he believed the lie that water sprouts take energy from the tree. And the tree, every time he cut off one water sprout, he got two back the next year.
It's like a hydra.
Yes, it is like a hydra. That's a good analogy, right? So he could never figure out why, and this is why, right? If the tree is producing water sprouts, it's telling you it needs more energy, and it's investing in producing these new side branches to expand its solar panels to get more leaf matter to produce the energy that it needs. Okay? Trust your tree. Your tree knows how to be a tree better than you know how to be a tree. Trust your tree. Okay? So water sprouts are not the enemy. And let me show you what these look like. So this is a branch that I cut off of the apple tree that I'm actually pruning this clip after some of the other stuff, so I already pruned this. In the big tree, I'm going to prune a little bit down the road in this video. I talk about a mostly dead branch that I cut off, and this is it. And if we look at the end grain, there is, let me grab a pencil, there we go. There is a very small wedge of living tissue here, right there, right down here at the bottom, and the rest of the branch is dead. So this branch is not dead because of disease. This branch is dead because, again, the tree wants to control itself. It wants to be the best solar panel that it can possibly be. So when a branch is shaded and the tree is investing energy in maintaining the life of the branch, but the branch is not returning that energy in terms of photosynthetic output, i.e. sugars and starches and auxins and hormones and all the other things that the branch produces, that hormonal signal says, oh, this branch is not producing, giving enough hormone feedback, it therefore is not producing enough energy, therefore the tree will abort it. Okay? It will abort it in the branch stub by sealing off the branch stub, blocking energy from going into the branch, and then the branch will die and self-prune. Okay? So this was in the process of being self-pruned. But while it's dead, you can see this is one of those epicormic branches. And you can recognize them because there's a huge difference in diameter between the branches growing out of and this little sprout. Okay? When the branches which are produced in real time in the normal growth of the tree, you will have a natural even transition of taper from large to medium to thin to spindly as you go out from the trunk toward the twigs. When you see something like this where you have a big honking lump of wood and a teeny tiny little sprout coming up out of it, that's an epicormic branch. Okay? And if I turn this around to this one living wedge that's still left in it, is trying to produce one last attempt. Okay? Because the tree as a whole has decided to abort this branch, but that little bud doesn't know that yet. And so that little bud is saying, hey, I don't have any inhibitory hormone coming down from the top anymore, I'm going to try and grow. Now, it would not have been successful, but it shows the process. Okay? So if you go into your tree and you prune off too much, and you change that hormone balance too drastically all at once, you will just get an explosion of these epicormic branches. Okay? Now, don't do that. How do you prevent that? Well, maintain your pruning less than 30%. I like to say shoot for 25%. That will keep you a little bit less than 30%. 30% is kind of the threshold. At 30%, you will have some epicormic branch production stimulated by the pruning, but it won't be unmanageable. Above 30%, it's unmanageable. So stay below that 30% threshold. Shoot for 25, and then if you're off by a little bit, you're not going to create a major problem for yourself. And every water sprout you cut out counts as part of your 25%. Okay, because they are part of the photosynthetic capacity of that tree, right? So if you cut off all the water sprouts, and you look at it, and that's about 1/4 of the branches the tree was producing, you're done. You don't get to touch any of the major branches for that year. Do that, quit, let the tree grow another year, and then come back and touch the branches. Or if you touch a branch, then every unit of branch mass that you cut off is an equivalent unit of water sprouts that you're not allowed to touch and you need to leave in place, because they are part of the tree's food producing system. Okay? Now, when we have a branch, whether it's a young branch from a seedling or a recently produced water sprout, the first year is going to grow straight up, just like this guy, right? Straight up spindly branch. Straight up spindly branches don't produce fruit. They produce energy for the tree, they fuel the system, but they don't produce fruit themselves. Second year, that spindly branch will produce side branches. Those side branches still don't produce fruit. They produce energy for the system, but they don't produce fruit. The third year, those side branches will produce these little stubby branchlets called fruiting spurs. That's where it sets flower. Okay? Now, those fruiting spurs will then continue to develop and increase in complexity. So the more they develop, the more they increase in complexity, the more productive they become. So new growth on a tree, the first year, no fruit. Second year, no fruit. Third year, it will start to produce flowers and a couple of fruit, but it's not going to be spectacular. And then as those fruiting spurs increase in number and complexity, by year 5, you'll start to see what the potential of that branch is. By year 10, you'll really know. Okay? When you're looking at those epicormic branches, they're not evil. Again, they're producing energy for the tree. The heuristic isn't get rid of all of the epicormic branches. The heuristic is look at your branch. Say, if this branch is allowed to grow, will it shade something that's better? Okay? If it will, cut it off. It's a bad branch. Okay? Or look at the epicormic branch and say, is this branch growing into a direction where I don't already have branches? If that's true, leave it on. Because if that epicormic branch is growing and expanding the size and dimension of the tree into new space, that will, in 5 years, become a new productive branch, and you will have a better tree with it than without it. Okay? So it's not, is it or is it not a sucker that makes it good or bad? It's, is the sucker doing something useful or something detrimental? Okay? And both will be true any given year if you have a lot of suckers. When the tree really comes into itself and you get the trunk mostly shaded, light is another thing which stimulates breaking buds. Okay? When the tree really comes into itself, shades the trunk, and you have lots of growth and lots of hormone production from all of that growth, it will slow down and stop producing those water sprouts until there's a disturbance, a stress, a trauma to the tree, which reinitiates sprouting. Okay? Now, I've talked about fruiting spurs. I'm going to pause this little intro, go back to a clip I took earlier this summer where I can show you some good close-ups of what those fruiting spurs look like. Opportune filming moment. I was given some pear wood here that I'm going to try and make a little bit of lumber out of. But as I was going through the slash, I found this little branch, and I just wanted to point out one thing here. This branch is a normal growing branch, right? You can see it's straight, got regular branches and leaf scars on it as you would normally see. But if you look at this one here out at the tip, you see it's much, much gnarlier. Okay? There's a lot more going on. The growth has been a lot slower, and you can see all of these ridges. Okay? Each of those is 1 year's growth on this branch. So what's happened here is the growth is slowed way, way, way down, so you're only getting minute amounts of growth. Okay? This is a fruiting spur. That's what these are called. And your rose family fruit trees, they will produce these fruiting spurs on the side of larger branches. And these spurs are where the overwhelming majority of flowering and fruiting take place. Okay? So you have a branch grows a water sprout the first year. It Doesn't sap energy from the tree. It's just growing for height. Okay. Second year, it produces side branches. Third year, those side branches start to produce fruiting spurs. And right here, you can see that process just starting to take place where you have this teeny tiny little fruiting spur. Okay. So this will eventually grow out and develop into a complex fruiting spur like this beauty. When you're pruning fruit trees, you want to go and look for and identify the branches which have the largest number and largest complexity of fruiting spurs and preserve them, because they are always going to be your most productive, successfully fruiting branches. This is just a nice little opportune example of that concept. So now you know what those fruiting spurs look like. As you're sorting through your branches, you want to pick the branches which, as I already mentioned, firstly, are going in a direction and are capturing the sunlight that you want them to capture. And then if there's still more than one option, like there's two branches which are going in the same direction where you want to branch, you can look at them and see which has the best developed fruiting spurs. Okay? And leave the one that does and cut the one that doesn't. Okay? When you cut, you want to make a good cut. Okay, and to do that, we need to talk a little bit about the anatomy of a branch and how it hooks into a tree. So I have this little, that's probably the better side to show, this little piece of driftwood that I just picked up while trout fishing. Okay, so I go along fly fishing, and when I'm easily distracted, so I pick up things like this. And this is a little pine knot. But you can really see the branch attachments. We have a branch here, and we have a branch here, and this is the trunk. So this would have been, I'll hold it that way. This is how it would have been in life. Okay? So you can see the branches are growing upward at an angle, and that branch is continuing down into the tree. Okay? And now what happens is the branch, the wood comes down off of the branch and curls over, and then the wood from the trunk comes and curls up to the base of the branch. So you have this interweaving of branch wood, trunk wood, branch wood, trunk wood, branch wood, trunk wood, branch wood, trunk wood. And that is what makes the join, which allows the branches to be so firmly attached to the trunk. Okay? And you can see the stub extending down in from thin little baby branch out to big fat branch. And you can see the texture and the pattern of this wood, which shows that overlapping grain structure. Okay? Now, why do we care about this? Why do we care about what's going on in the trunk? Well, because when we make a cut, we're going to make a wound on the tree, and we don't want that wound to turn into disease. Okay? So, when a branch is willfully aborted by the tree, as I described earlier, the ones that are shaded out too much and are aborted, or if the branch is damaged, you have the same thing happen. And that is the tree, first of all, a tree cannot, I repeat, a tree cannot replace internal damaged tissue. Trees can only grow out. They can never turn around and fill a void. Okay? So the tree strategy is to allow the void to only get so big by walling it off and building a wall that rot can't get through. It does that by coming in and filling up all of the cavities in the wood at these overlapping layers with either soft parenchyma tissue, which is alive and therefore not as prone to rot, or, in the case of pines, just chocking it full of resin. And that's where you get fat wood in pine trees. Okay? When, at these junctures are then walled off with pine resin. Okay? So it's going to wall this off. So if rot gets into here, it can rot down the branch stub, but it can't expand horizontally into the tree proper. Okay? And this is where you get your really good birdie holes, right? Bird nests are these rotten out stubs. So the rot can mirror, you can see the shape of the stub down here in the tree. That can rot out, and then all the wood around is going to be completely intact for the rest of the life of the tree because it walls it off. Now, that is only true if you don't damage the trunk. So if you damage this wood, which belongs to the trunk, that breaks that barrier, and now rot can get in and start going into the heartwood of the tree. That's bad. So to avoid that, if you look here, where's the, yeah, right there is the best viewing angle. You see right here, there's this, I'll grab my pencil again, just use it as a pointer. Right along here, there's that little swelling at the base of the trunk. Right there. So this branch stub has a completely vertical surface, and then it flares out in this little bubble. The flare belongs to the trunk, the straight wood belongs to the branch. So you only want to cut the wood which belongs to the branch, so your cut line is right there. Okay, that's what we call the branch collar. So when you're cutting off a branch in a pruning cut, you want to make sure you never wound the collar. You always want to stay outside of it. You want to cut right up to it, but you're not allowed to wound the collar itself. If you wound the collars, you get hollow trees. If you don't wound the collars, you get intact trees with a few hollow branch stubs in them. Okay? Now, that was not really known and understood in the first half of the 1900s. And when we're looking at 100-year-old apple trees, they're all hollow because they were taught, I'm not sure exactly when this changed, I think like 60s or 70s, I could be wrong. If you know exactly when this changed, pop a comment in. But trees that are older than that are all hollow because for a long time arborists taught to cut flush with the trunk, which always wounds the collar and always produces a hollow tree. Okay? So if you have an old hollow tree, don't worry about it because the tree can compartmentalize that hollow as well. So if you wound the collar, the tree can hollow out to that point, but from there out, all future growth will be walled off, will be compartmentalized. So the hollow can only get so big. So a hollow tree is fine. It's not going to die on you. But if you have a tree that's been pruned properly, or a young tree that you're just starting to work with, make proper pruning cuts and you won't add to the world's collection of hollow apple trees. Okay? So that's good to know. Pruning tools. For small branches, I very much recommend bypass pruners. So if you see these, the blade comes past the edge of the anvil. Okay? That's going to make your cleanest cut, and I need to clean these a bit and sharpen them, but do sharpen them. You can pull them open and sharpen them. I usually just sharpen them with a file, but you can also sharpen them with a small stone and get them even sharper. Okay? I like these. I don't have brand loyalty, right? I really don't have brand loyalty, but I do have a style loyalty. And I very much prefer these that are just a simple, one-piece, straight, uncomplicated handle dipped in a little rubber. Get this style. Every company that makes good pruners makes this style, right? Corona makes good pruners, Felco makes good pruners, there's dozens of others that make good pruners, right? I don't care, but get this style. They're simpler. They're usually a little less expensive than, I'll just call them fancy handle pruners, where you go to a large store that has a bunch of different pruners. You guys have all these different fancy handle pruners, right? I don't like any of them because they all break. They've all got way too much plastic in them, and you're pruning in the cold season, plastic gets brittle, they shatter. Get simple pruners, okay? They're usually less money, and this pair of pruners, well maintained, will last your lifetime. Or until it falls out of your pockets and you lose it. That's usually the fate of pruners. But the very rarely do pruners die a natural death, we'll say, right? So the get simple pruners. They are better. They last longer. Also, I don't prefer the mallet and anvil style of pruners where you have a solid surface and the blade comes and hits a solid surface, because if they are 100% perfectly adjusted, they work well. But if there's any maladjustment, even to the smallest degree, they crush the cambium and rip the edge of your branch. Okay? So get bypass pruners where the blade comes all the way past the anvil. And get simple handles. Once you've met those type of criteria, get whatever brand's handy. I don't care. It's not important. Okay? This is why I'm not a monetized channel. Anyhow. So far, if you're curious, Old Ways Rising Farm has earned exactly $0. Anyhow. Saws. You also need a good pruning saw. Don't try to cut anything bigger than about your thumb with the hand pruners. And even something the size of your thumb is dicey. Fruit wood is hard. You don't want to be munching and jamming on your pruners. Okay, you're going to destroy tissue and open up a large wound and damage the collar. Okay, remember, we're trying to not damage the collar. So don't munch on it with, with dull tools or try to take off more than your tool can chew, literally, right? How big can you cut will depend on what you're pruning. So apple is really hard. Something the size of your finger, going to be easy. Something the size of your thumb is going to be hard, and nothing bigger than your thumb, should you cut with that. If you're pruning something that's really soft, if you're pruning some pines or some aspen or something, yeah, you can get a little bigger. If you're pruning something that's like stupidly hard, like yew or ironwood, smaller, right? But you'll see that as you go. So once it's too big for this, I go immediately to your pruning saw. Okay? This one happens to be Corona. I have no brand loyalty on saws either. This is what my local hardware store has. So, but do get a good saw. The bigger the branch, the bigger the saw. This will cut anything up to about the size of your wrist. If you are going to something bigger than the size of your wrist, then you want to get a fixed blade saw. I didn't grab one here for this video. I have them, I just didn't grab one. I like fixed blade saws in the bigger sizes because they're a little less wobbly, right? But, up to these 8 to 10 inch saws, the folders are nice because you can stick them in your back pocket. You notice I don't have long-handled loppers. I don't like them. I don't have as much control with the long-handled loppers as I do with the saw. I can make a cleaner cut. Now, notice how I'm saying this. I personally can make a cleaner cut with this tool than with long-handled loppers. If that's not true for you and long-handled loppers work for you, use them. Not telling you not to. Just sharing what works well for me. Okay? And again, the same rule for jaw type works with long-handled loppers. Get the bypass jaw, not the mallet and anvil style jaw. Okay, you'll get much cleaner cuts that way. And then, on your medium-sized branches, you can go either this or the loppers, depending on your preference. My preference is the saw. That's for tools. Now, the next question is, after you've made your cut, you've put your cut at the proper location, to seal or not to seal? That is the next question. And the jury, honestly, in the literature, the jury is out on the benefits of sealer. Okay? Because you can go out and you can find people who have studied this and they'll say, always seal to keep out disease. Right? You'll find that opinion. You'll also find the counter opinion that say, never seal because you might accidentally glue disease-causing organisms to the surface of your cut and guarantee infection. To seal or not to seal? I'm going to say that there is not a definitive answer to the question today. I'll share what I like to do. Remember, the tree cannot fill a void. So when you make your cut, the tree is going to grow up over and close that wound from the sides. Okay? So what you really want is from all sides of the cut for that wood to come up flat across your nice flat, even, well-made cut and stick together. And when these come up and touch, they will actually graft to each other a lot of the time. And even if they don't, they will seal with such force that no water or disease is ever getting in there again. Right? So what you want to have happen is you want to have this come up and close faster than the stub rots. Because if the stub rots, now it's going to come up, it's going to come over, but once you get soft tissue, instead of continuing flat and horizontal, it's going to curl under. And at that point, it's growing down more than across, and the curl just keeps getting more and more curly without ever closing that gap. And then you get rot coming in 10 out of 10 times. So my heuristic for when I seal is when I make a big cut, because I want to keep that the surface of that wood from rotting. Okay? If the cut is going to heal over in 1 to 2 years, don't worry about it. Right? So anything you can cut with these, I'm not going to put sealer on. Because they're going to heal over in a year or two. Doesn't matter. The chances of sealing in a disease and causing a problem are equal to the chances of preventing a problem, right? So I'm not going to mess with it on those small cuts because I know they will heal up so fast it's not going to be a big deal. And I know that I have made a good cut, so it will be well compartmentalized even if there is a deal. But then when I cut something the size of my wrist, I will put some of the goop on it to delay rot from occurring in the middle of that stub. That way it seals over completely in time. You know, if it's going to take 4 or 5 years to seal over, go ahead and paint it. Okay? So that's my opinion. You will find other opinions out there. That's fine. I'm just trying to explain the diversity of thought and how I personally assimilate that information. And that brings us to, thank you for bearing with me. I promise we're going to go prune some trees very, very soon. Don't look at the timestamp. The last little bit of this nuts and bolts section that we're going to, that we really need to talk about is when to prune your fruit trees. And again, there's a lot of stuff out there. You must prune this month, right? This week, this month. I don't want you to think about it that way. I want you to observe your trees and see what they're doing. So in the fall of the year, the trees have invested all of this energy in these leaves. Those leaves have produced a ton of starches and sugars and hormones and secondary metabolites and all the stuff that they do. And the tree now knows that fall is coming and it's about to lose all those leaves. So about 2 weeks before the leaves start to turn colors, the tree begins reversing the direction of nutrient flow from up toward the leaves to feed them to down from the leaves to store the energy contained within them. Okay? So through the summer, the tree is pushing energy up fluids containing nutrients up into those leaves so that they have all of the resources they need to manufacture sugar. Okay? About 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks before the first leaf changes color, it's sucking all of that nutrient down out of the leaves for winter storage. Okay? When all of the nutrients have been sucked out of the leaf, then again, remember we've talked about compartmentalization. The tree can put extra cells in a layer of tissue to wall it off. The trees actively compartmentalize the bottom of the leaves. That's when they change color. And then that new tissue that the tree is stuffing in the base of the leaf, at the base of the petiole, will eventually make a little bit of a mound of tissue and push the leaf off, and that's when it falls. Okay? So we have the tree taking all of this energy down out of the leaves. Then it has to do something with it. So starting there, that couple weeks before the color change, the tree is sucking all this stuff out. It's going to start to produce a lot of growth in the branch. So this is where your branch is really going to thicken, okay, and produce a lot of that summer wood. Most of what we call summer wood in your tree rings is actually made in the fall. So the tree is taking all of that energy and it's going to really start to plump up and build tissue and build the storage capacity so it has somewhere to put that energy over the winter. That is going to start that couple weeks before color up, continue through color, through leaf fall, and then for about 2 weeks after the last leaf has fallen from the tree, it's still actively making tissue, thickening branches, thickening roots, extending roots. Okay? So that it has room to put all of that energy. And then about 2 weeks to 3 weeks after leaf fall, it's stored all of that energy, and now it goes into complete dormancy for the winter. At that point, you can start pruning. Okay? Because you're cutting off, you've given the tree the maximum ability to remove and relocate all of those nutrients. Okay? If you cut before then, you're denying the tree access to some of its winter stores. Right? But starting 2 to 3 weeks after leaf fall, you can start pruning because you're not removing energy which could have been stored somewhere else. Yes, there is some energy stored exactly in that branch. The tree stores energy everywhere, but you're not taking energy that would have gone down into the roots and preventing it from getting there. Okay? And then you can cut anywhere through the dormant season. Now in spring, when we start to get warm days, the sap flow starts. So now the tree is liberating that winter stored energy from the roots, from the bark, from the cambium, from the branches, from everywhere, from the pith, from the parenchyma rays, from all of those regions of the tissue where it has stored energy, and it's starting to reliberate it, push it back up into the branches. Right, so that ends the optimum pruning season. Okay, so your optimum pruning season is from 2 weeks after leaf fall until the sap flow starts. Okay, late in my climate, that's late February and March, where the sap run really starts in with gusto. Okay, and then once the sap run is progressed to the point that the buds are starting to swell, now you really need to stop, because now the tree is starting to go energy negative and invest that energy in leaf growth. Right, so now you really need to let it get a return on its investment from that point on. Right, so that's your pruning window. And this is going to vary. You're not going to have the same answer to when you should prune if you live in Maine as if you live in North Carolina. Right? It's going to be very, very different. Watch your trees, live with your trees, listen to what your trees are telling you through their behavior. Okay? Leaf fall, don't prune. 2 weeks after leaf fall, you can start pruning. Prune all winter, and then when the sap run really gets going, stop pruning. Okay? That's your window. And that's subjective. The reason you have, like if you go out and you try to read when is the best time to prune an apple, you're going to have all sorts of different answers. And those are all correct answers for some climate. But only one of them is correct for your climate. Okay? That's the basics of the nuts and bolts. Let's go out and look at a couple of trees and do some pruning. Now that we've gone all over the little nitty-gritty nuts and bolts, I wanted to actually come out and talk about some trees and actually make some pruning cuts on some trees. The golden rule is that you can never cut more than 1/4 to 1/3 the leaf area of the tree. That is the golden rule because you have to remember when we're looking at these trees, everything about tree growth is hormonally driven. These branch tips out here are producing a hormone which is transported down the tree and stimulates root growth. The roots, the root tips, as they grow, they're producing a hormone which comes up and stimulates branch growth. So there's a give and take which maintains a balanced root to shoot ratio. Okay? And every tree has a certain root to shoot ratio that it wants to maintain, and that is measured by those hormones. So if we come in and arbitrarily just cut and whop half of this tree off, that's going to so fundamentally upset that root to shoot ratio balance that the tree is just going to explode in sucker growth. Okay, it's self-defeating. So this is one area where a lot of people get in trouble when they're coming out to prune trees, is they'll think, oh, somebody told me I have to kill every water sprout. And then they'll go and they'll take out all the water sprouts, and then they'll realize, oh, I didn't actually do anything to prune my tree, and then they'll take out more, and they end up with 30, 40, 50% of the tree removed, and then it grows this whole bunch of more water sprouts. Okay? Water sprouts are telling you that your root to shoot ratio is already out of balance. So if you've just got this huge explosion of water sprouts, you need to let some of them go. The tree needs to be able to make enough leaves to make enough sugar to supply all of those roots. Okay? They're not hurting you. Water sprouts contribute to the energy of a tree. Some people say that water sprouts siphon energy off of the tree. That's completely backwards. They contribute energy to the tree. The tree makes them when it's not producing enough energy. Okay? So don't just willy-nilly declare war on your water sprouts. What you want to do is you want to evaluate the tree and cut that 20 to 25% or less in such a way that you're maximizing the beneficial impact of what you do. Okay? Remember, we talked about fruiting spurs already. This is this is about 20 years old or so. I know its history. I planted this for my parents on my parents' farm when I was a kid. It's really had very little pruning ever done to it, but it's a full dwarf, so it's growing very, 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 very slowly. Okay? It's a very uncomplicated tree. I can completely ignore this tree, take 0 off, and it wouldn't really hurt anything. But because it's so simple, it will let us talk about what is a good branch to remove and a good branch to cut. Now, because it's older, just about all of these branches have robust assemblages of fruiting spurs. Okay? So any of these branches are going to be productive. So if I want to come in and say, let's prune this tree, I'm looking for branches that are interfering with each other or are shading each other, and thus reducing the ability of those fruiting spurs to actually be productive. Okay? So if I look in this region, I see right here is a crossing branch. This is bad because they can damage each other. Now, bad is a relative term. As I said at the beginning, I could do nothing to this tree and it would be totally fine, right? But if we want to prune it, we can look here, we can see a crossing branch. Well, that's not ideal, okay? And then here again, we have a crossing branch. That's not ideal. This is a young sprout. It doesn't have any fruiting spurs on it, but I'm totally happy leaving this because it's expanding the tree out in a direction where there's no competition for light. So this is contributing energy to the tree, and in another 3 years it will have fruiting spurs on it, and it will look like these branches over here that are productive branches. Okay? So I want to take one of these two. Well, where do they go? This one comes out over my head and into open space, so it's not interfering with anything. Whereas this one, even though it's the bigger, more developed branch, it comes up, and this branch is coming under and shaded by this. And if I evaluate these two, this is a big, mature, large, well-developed, fruitful branch, and this is a spindly little thing that's just trying to compete it to be a little brat. Okay? So this is a bratty branch. We want to cut off the bratty branches. Okay? This further extension, which comes off of this and goes up that way, is growing into the core of the tree. It's good for disease prevention to keep the core of your trees open. There's an old saying that a bird should be able to fly through your tree from any direction without being forced to land. That's about keeping light penetration into the core of the tree to spur fruit production. That's also about disease management, because disease needs long duration surface moisture on the leaves and the branches in order to take over and actually successfully colonize and produce disease characteristics. So we want to keep it open so sunlight can get in. That sunlight dries out the leaves. It lets wind come through, dry out the leaves, and that manages disease. And oh, by the way, while that sunlight is hanging in on those branches, it's producing fruit. So when I'm looking, this crossing branch, even though this branch is larger, it's being a jerk. Okay? It's clogging up our middle. It's competing with this even larger branch. So I'm going to cut this larger branch and let this one, even though it's the smaller branch, come off into this space. Okay? Now, where do I cut it? Well, if I come down, I have this branch. This is kind of a jerk branch coming in under here, and it's shaded, and it's not going to be productive. So I don't care about this piece. Can they see where my hand is, beloved? Okay. So I don't care about this piece. This can go. But this little piece here, this is headed off into open space. So I'd like to keep this. So I'm going to take my saw, and I'm going to make a slanting cut so that water runs off it, and remove the jerk branch. Okay? That's a fairly sizable piece taken out. And then we can look at a couple other spots in here. And this branch is just shaded. It's never going to be productive. So I'll take it out. This one was a major removal. Okay? So this would be a good candidate for painting. However, I don't think it's going to take all that long for this to heal up, so I'm not too awful worried about it. Okay? This is a tiny removal. I'm definitely not... This is kind of as big as you want to go before you start painting your wounds. I'm not really concerned about this one, but any bigger, and I'd be concerned about it. Okay? This little guy, I'm definitely not concerned about. We can just nip him right above that collar we talked about. So that comes off, so that's opening up the core. Now I just look around. I've got a little branch here. Can they see where my hand is, beloved?
Yes.
Okay. This is going up and competing with other stuff up there. So that's going to come out, open up the tree a little bit more. This is a little sprout. We can just take him off, open up the tree a little bit more. This guy here, is this still in view?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That can come out. Again, open up the tree a little more, because that was growing in toward the middle. Same with this one. Again, all these smaller pieces. I'm just cutting right at the collar with this. That will compartmentalize, be encapsulated, done. No disease worries. Looking... This is a little gnarly thing that just came up and grew in. So that can come off. There's two crossing branches there, even though small. That can come off. This is trying to come into the middle. We don't need that. This is a nice vertical extension. Over here, can they see these two branches?
No.
Okay. So this branch is coming up and over. This branch is going straight up. And this space here where my fist is overshaded by this much more productive branch. So I'm going to take both of those. I'm going to take this one off. That's his borderline. Maybe I should have used the saw, but it's okay. There we go. Take that one off. We'll take that one off. Just to open up this space a little bit, let the light in, let our birds through, prevent disease. Now, the last thing that I want to look at in this tree, get the saw out again just because I can't reach with the clippers, is this branch right here. Can they see that?
No.
Branch right here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. See, this branch is a nice, large, productive branch, lots of nice fruiting spurs, but it's coming out and it's shading this. And this is a larger branch, more productive than this. So, I almost can't reach this one. There. Cut him off. Okay. Not my best cut in my life, but it'll heal over just fine. It's a fairly small cut. So, we're really done with this tree. That's all I'm going to do. I've maybe taken off 5 or 10% of the branch area. Probably more like 10% of the branch area. Am I in view? Okay. 10% of the branch area. And we've just let some light in. And notice how when I say between these two branches, This is the keeper. This is the one that's shading it or competing with it. I'm cutting one entirely and leaving the other entirely. That's key because of how these trees produce the fruiting spurs. Okay? You don't ever just shear back to a core structure. If you do that, it's 3 years till you have another flower, minimum, and 5 to 10 years till it gets good again. So you don't want to ever do that. Once you say, this is the branch that I'm keeping, you don't touch it. And then you cut out everything that's competing with it. Okay? There's some other little things that we could maybe nitpick at, but it's good. That's your basic principle. And when you're maintaining younger, relatively simple trees, that's all you really need to care about. Okay, just what we did there. Now, many of you on established farms, having established orchards, are going to have large established trees. So let's go look at a large established trees that needs some restoring, and I'll talk about how we think through those sorts of pruning cuts. So this is a, I would say, pretty representative big old giant family farm apple tree sitting right there. Okay, now overall this tree is probably 150 years old. Okay, this is not a baby. It has been living there, taking care of itself, and has not been pruned that many times in that 150 years. So again, if you miss pruning a tree in a given year, you're not killing it. Okay, that's one thing I want you to keep in mind. You're not killing it. But at the same time, we can look at this tree and we can do a few things to help it be a little bit more productive, to help it maximize the productivity of its best branches, and maybe get a couple more apples off of it than we have been. So I'm going to go move the camera forward and look at a couple of specific spots, but I wanted to give you kind of a big picture view of the tree that we're looking at. Now, when you're looking at a tree as large and complex as this particular one is, you just have to kind of dissect it one little cluster of branches at a time. So if you look behind me, we have a group of water sprouts that are growing out of a region of a tree where there had been a big major structural branch that was pulled out by weather. Okay, so this branch came out, that disrupted the hormonal signaling of the tree between that root-shoot ratio maintaining signal, and it produced a whole bunch of water sprouts to reoccupy this area. Those have all either died out because they got shaded or have produced large productive branches in their own right. So again, water sprouts are not a bad thing. They're a choice. Do you want the tree to expand in this direction or not, right? I have not molested these water sprouts, and this tree is on, the property where I grew up as a kid, so I've known this tree for 35 years. They have grown up. They have occupied this space. They have become nice, mature branches. And now it's time to thin them down a little bit. So as I'm looking here, this one is dead. This one has died out because it was too shaded. The tree aborted it. So this is going to come out for sure. This one has a little life in it, but not much. So it's also an easy pick. This one, can they see my finger, beloved?
Yes.
Okay. This branch right here, let me get out my saw so I can point to it a little bit better. This has taken over the role of big structural branch and is keeping all of this tissue alive. Okay? I really want to keep this area alive, otherwise it's going to open up a big region. If this all dies out, it's going to open up a big rot region on a tree that already has a big hollow in it. Okay? So this branch is important for the life of the tree. So that's going to stay. This branch and this branch are doing nothing but competing with my branch that's going to get kept. So I'm going to do absolutely nothing to this one. I'm going to clear out all this area underneath it. So I'm going to start picking some of this apart, and we'll go through this in clips. Now, when we start talking about bigger branches like this, you don't want to just cut it right at the proper collar location all at once. you want to, because if you do, it has so much weight on it, it can often like strip bark down the tree. And then again, we're introducing more opportunities for rot and disease to get into the trunk. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to come out a ways. We want to make a cut in the bottom, and this is awkward, especially when I'm trying to do it so you can see what I'm doing. An inch or so deep in the bottom of this branch. Okay. Oh, this is in view, hon? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Now, here's my initial cut. Now I'm going to come over to here and cut down from the top and cut the whole branch off. And that one didn't break, but often this will break and try to tear bark, and that stop cut prevents the bark from tearing off at that location. Now that all the weight has been removed from this, I can come in and I can make the proper pruning cut right here at the collar. It can be sometimes a little hard to judge where the collar is on these swollen knobs, but that's pretty darn close. So with the weight removed, we can just take this clean off. And a good sharp blade on a good sharp pruning saw. Make pretty quick work of this. This is a pretty big branch too. Now when we're very close, when it's starting to give, support it with your hand and you'll get a nice cut like that. Now cuts in this size, we definitely want to treat with goop. Okay. And the middle is the most important region to get treated, and you kind of got to be quick with it because they'll almost always start leaking some sap, and especially in freezing weather like this, that's going to freeze up. So you just do as good as you can, and then when things solidify and warm up in the spring, you can come back and retreat if you didn't get it all. Now we're here on the other side of this tree, and this is another little clump of old water sprouts that grew into large mature fruit producing branches that I came and thinned down. Now out of this clump I picked two to keep. So this one, because it's coming off in this direction, it's occupying its own space, it's collecting sunlight that none of the rest of the tree is collecting, so it gets to stay. It has a little damage down here, but I think it'll overgrow that damage without too much trouble, so I'm not too worried about that. If it doesn't, we'll get water sprouts out of this. Right there's a branch that'll probably start to produce a large branch. So if this dies, I can replace it with something. And then I kept this one because, again, it goes way out over my head and all the way it actually touches the ground in the snow over there. So again, it's reaching out and it's expanding and it's collecting sunlight that none of the rest of the tree is collecting. And then the rest of these, there was one right here, there was one right here, and there were a cut that were big, same size as this or bigger, and then there was a bunch of other little scrubby stuff that I cut out. I cut those out entirely so that they wouldn't compete with these two branches, and then these two I left alone. I haven't sheared or done a lot of work on them, except to cut this one bit out because it was directly shading this piece, okay? And that's just how you work. When you're looking at one of these big complex trees, you pick a cluster and you simplify it. And you pick another cluster and you simplify it until you get close to that 20-25% of the leaf area, and then you quit. Dead branches don't count as part of that 25%, okay, only living branches. So the one dead branch over there doesn't count. But this was a big removal of tissue from this tree. So was over there. So I'm done with this tree for the year. This is enough. You get these big trees, you can't do it all at once. Pick one, maybe two little spots to work on them well, wait a year. Otherwise you're going to so upset that hormonal balance in the tree that's just going to explode with epicormic branching. So I hope this helps you think through your pruning decisions. Now, we've looked at mature trees in this video, and that's because it's what I have access to. I'm going back to some properties other than our home farm and pruning trees that have been around for a minute. I do have trees at our home farm that are young, and at some point here I will do a video working with a tree at an earlier stage, but they're not ready for it. You don't need to prune the year you plant. You plant, you let it go, let it establish, just, to make a horse riding analogy, let the horse have its head, right? You want to let the tree have its head for a couple of years, and then you can go in and do your pruning. If you're going to grotesquely shape a tree, like espalier or espalier, again, I still don't know how to say that correctly, which of those is right, but some of those things you need to do earlier, but that's a special case, right? If you're planting a tree this year, don't prune it, right? Or just prune it back evenly a little bit if you're worried that there was root damage, right? So you can look, if you look at the roots coming out of your pot, you say, oh my gosh, these roots look smelly, right? Hopefully not literally smelly, or it's probably a dead tree, but these roots do not look good. Then you want to bring the top down a little bit just to help it with transplant shock. That's a different style of pruning. We're not talking about fruit production yet. But let the tree kind of have its head for a while, let it grow for a couple of years, and you come down and do young tree pruning. When I have trees available to show you young tree pruning, we'll do a video on that. Also, there's some other special cases that I'm trying to talk to some people to get access to some trees, and we may do some special case videos about some other types of tree pruning. But this is your basic pruning video for what you're likely to see in an average homestead situation, right? Not an orchard, not a commercial production setting. Average homestead working with average, usually older apple trees, okay? Or peach trees or pear trees, whatever. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. I hope that it has given you something to think about and some information. And if you were so inclined, you could go on and visit our recently created Patreon page. I would be most grateful for that. But either way, I hope that you have a wonderful, blessed day, and we'll see you next time here at Old Race Recipe.